If anything like this is happening to you, go to the doctor, now. I'm not going to say where we live. I'm not going to use our real names. All of this happened. If any of it sounds familiar or it's happening to someone in your life, go to the doctor. Don't wait. People have already died, and we're not being told. This is how it started for us. You haven't noticed how distant you've been the last couple of days? No. I have no idea why. I feel fine. A little depressed, but nothing more. My husband promised me and the kids he would do better. I thought maybe it was because he was about to turn 40. We had just got back from our trip to Disney World, and as far as he was concerned, everything was great. He ran a small fever for a couple of days after we got home, and it took a while for his ears to pop from the plane. Other than that, everything seemed normal. I felt guilty for having to say something about him being distant. I had to. It was completely out of his character. A week went by. He was complaining that he felt like crap all the time, but he had no idea why. He was sweating. I made him go to the doctor and they said that he had a sinus infection. Lots of mucus in his sinuses and excessive buildup in his ears. They gave him some antibiotics and sent him home. He woke up one night in a cold sweat. He told me his fingernails were burning. Like there was something underneath them. I had never heard that before. He took a couple of aspirin and tried to go back to sleep. He didn't. A few days went by and he had not slept at all. His mood was worse. He kept flexing his fingers, they were constantly moving. I looked things up on the internet to see if someone else had ever had the same issue. Nothing. One night I woke up and he wasn't in bed. I found him in the kitchen soaking his hands in the sink. The water was pouring out of the faucet and steam was fogging the kitchen window. He had a box of Epsom salts right next to him on the counter. "George? What are you doing?" "Oh. Nothing. Go back to bed, baby. I'll be right there." "What's going on?" "Nothing." I walked into the kitchen, and I could tell that he was trying to hide whatever was in the sink from me. When I got closer, I could see that the water in the sink had a pink hue. I turned my head. There was a pair of needle-nosed pliers on the kitchen island. Oh my God. "George? I'm okay. Seriously, look at me. I'm okay. I feel way better. I know how this looks." He had removed every nail from every finger. "It looks crazy. I know. I watched some videos on how to safely do it." "Are you insane? How to safely do it?" There was just this little voice in my head that gave me the answer. I took a couple of pills after I was done. The pain is gone. I'm not running a fever. I feel great. I wanted him to see a doctor the next day, and he agreed. I should have insisted that I go along just to make sure he went, but I didn't. He never went to the doctor. He told me later that something told him not to. He slept like a baby for 2 days. He even called off a day from work. Other than the bandages on all of his fingers, he was himself again. I told him I wanted him to see a therapist. I was worried. The morning of the 3rd day, I found him in the garage. He was staring at the wall. He was speaking. It sounded like he was speaking backwards, but he wasn't. The words he was saying were in English, but they were all garbled up. A kind of verbal dyslexia. Word fragments that were smashed together at random. That's the only way I can describe it. When I walked over and shook him, he immediately snapped out of it like nothing was wrong at all. Just sleepwalking, I think. I think I was dreaming that I was having a conversation myself. He laughed it off, got dressed and then went to work. He came home 5 hours later. He had threatened to kill a coworker. They fired him. They didn't call the police because he agreed to leave. He had no explanation. He was as dumbfounded and terrified as I was. I don't even remember doing any of it. I barely remember coming home. What's going on with me? I don't know. We need to get you in to see someone. Dash. I worried he had a brain tumor. I made him an appointment for the next morning. He began running a fever again in the early evening. I had my sister take the kids for the night. After I dropped them off, I ran to the store to pick up some medicine. When I got home, I could hear him inside crying. I opened the door, and the walls of the entryway had been broken and torn out in several places. He was crying in our bedroom at the back of the house. As I walked through, I could see that he had torn gaping holes in every wall. The bits of wall and the insulation inside had been yanked out and thrown all over the house. Bloody handprints were everywhere. I found him in our bedroom. He was naked and crumpled in the corner. A sledgehammer was on the floor next to him. His fingers were dripping, the bandages had fallen off. Holly, what the hell is wrong with me? He was covered in sweat and his own blood from his hands. He was burning up. Oh my God. Holly? Something is wrong? You're burning up bad. There's something in the walls, baby. I can hear it, it won't stop talking to me, it's driving me crazy. You need an ambulance. I need an ambulance. I ran to the bathroom and started an ice-cold bath. I had no idea how long it would take for an ambulance to get there. We live 20 miles from town. I called 911 while I dumped all of the ice from the freezer into the bath. There wasn't much, so I threw every bit of frozen food we had into the water as well. I went back into the room to help him up. His body was so slick, it was hard for me to get a grip on him. He was barely able to walk to the bathroom, and he slipped and fell into the tub. I heard a bone snap in his leg, but he didn't even react to it. It was the water he reacted to. Too cold. No, too cold. He was trying to get out of it. He was starting to speak in those jumbled words. He was begging me to help him out of the cold water. I tried to explain to him that he needed to cool down, and then he started convulsing. I didn't know what to do. I held his head above the water and I tried to keep him from thrashing around and hurting himself. I could see that his leg was broken. It flopped around in the tub like a rubber snake. His head kept going underneath the water. I was struggling to keep his face above it. I could hear the ambulance coming outside and he slowly stopped convulsing. I felt something warm spill onto my hand that was around his head. A large insect that looked like a millipede wriggled out of his ear onto the top of my hand. I instinctively jerked away, and I saw the bug plop down into the water. I pulled him out of the tub. My only thought was to get him away from the thing. I couldn't get him out. I could only push the water next to it with my hand, sending it towards my husband's feet. I watched the insect writhe and convulse, until finally, it quit moving. What's going on? George? Why am I so tired? Help me. Dash. By the time we got to the emergency room, my husband's fever was gone. He was speaking normally. Other than his broken leg and his hands, he was fine. I had scooped the insect out of the bath water with a plastic bag and I gave it to the doctor at the emergency room. I was surprised when he quickly stuck it in his coat pocket. He didn't ask me any questions about it. They wanted to keep George overnight for observation. They gave him a sedative that would finally knock him out. I fell asleep in the chair next to his bed. Dash. It was the middle of the night when a new doctor I had not seen before came back into the room. As my eyes focused, I saw that he had his finger over closed lips and he was carrying a few items. He squatted next to my chair and whispered, "I need to check something. Please be silent." "Okay?" I nodded. He went over to my husband and moved his head to the right. He put some metal tools, a small bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a small plastic container on the bedside table, and then he shined a light down into my husband's ear. I watched him use a metal tool to scrape along the inside of George's ear. I heard a pop. He grabbed a pair of long tweezers and used them to pull out a tumor of some kind from George's ear. A moist sac about the size of a small grape. He plopped the tumor into the plastic cup, grabbed the bottle of rubbing alcohol, and then walked over to me. He squatted down and took one of his fingers and pushed on the tumor until it popped. Inside of it were hundreds of tiny worms. They were crawling all over each other. I stared at them while he whispered, "Your husband is a very lucky man. I'm glad you got here when you did." This was about to hatch. Usually the mother stays until it does. The freezing water must have driven her out of her warm little nest. The little ones feed on her when they break out. They spread inside the host. It would have driven your husband completely mad, but not before the offspring would have spread to you and your children and any pets in your house. The doctor placed the plastic cup down on the floor and poured some of the rubbing alcohol into it. All of the small worms convulsed and then slowly stopped moving. The doctor looked back up at me. "What I'm about to tell you, I can't say out loud. There's too much money involved. Have you been to Florida, Alabama, or Mississippi lately? We just got back from Disney World a couple of weeks ago. Well, this is all I'm going to say. Your husband is going to be okay. Lots of doctors and coroners back east are having similar cases, and those that are speaking up are losing their credentials. Doctors will treat it, but it'll never be documented. They will never acknowledge it. I'm not going to. No one is listening, because they're paid not to. The people who caused this are trying to figure out how to fix it. They won't. It's going to get worse. When you have billionaires genetically modifying insects and introducing them into the wild, you're going to get mutations. Not just from those insects, but from the normal insects who feed on them. Those mutations that they insist are a myth right now, are starting to spread. Stay away from anyone who acts like your husband has been." He got up and left. My husband's symptoms were attributed to a psychotic episode. I warned my close family and friends, but I felt like that wasn't enough. That's why I wrote this, and I'm leaving it here. Try and stay safe.